Joining me now to react to the Pell interview, plus the big stories of 2020, and to unveil our Persons of the Year, is the Papal Posse, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org and visiting fellow at Thomas More College, Robert Royal, as well as canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father GERALD Murray. Thank you both for being here. Gentlemen, I want to get your reaction to this very candid Pell interview and the book. The Cardinal said at one point, it's highly likely that money went from the Vatican to Australia, but the purpose is not clear. Your thoughts on that? Father Jerry.
Well, Raymond, that is interesting that the Cardinal referred to that. There was a media report about a large sum of money being sent to the nunciature in Australia, and then there was a second report that the nuncio from Australia came to Rome and met with Pope Francis, and he was the nuncio at the time that that money was transferred. So undoubtedly that is part of the investigation. It's known, and the Cardinal says it in the interview, that he was at cross purposes with Cardinal Becciu. And as we know, Cardinal Becciu has been demoted by Pope Francis based on charges related to other matters that appear to indicate corruption, financial corruption in particular. So, as the Cardinal says, there is an investigation going on. I'm very interested to see where it leads.
Robert Royal, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was very much impressed, both in the book and in the interview you did, Raymond, with his calmness of spirit. He kind of is a believer that truth is what we're all based in, and that eventually truth will win out. And this from a man who knows that he was regarded as a member of the group of deplorables. He even uses that term in his book, in the state of Victoria in Australia, which meant that they wanted to punish someone. Now, we don't know if there was skullduggery in the background, but it's certainly suspicious when 700,000 euros, I think it was, or Australian dollars, I forget the denomination, but a huge amount of money went to Australia, and someone has got to track down and see what that is. It's not implausible, but we'll find out sometime.
Yeah. Moving on, I want to talk about these religious lockdowns we've seen across the country, gentlemen, in California, New York, Virginia, where you are, Robert. Give me a sense of your read on whether the bishops have been vocal enough this year about these rolling lockdowns that have now affected certainly the major metropolitan areas across the country. Have they said enough, Robert Royal?
Well, individual bishops, I think, have. We know that even Wilton Gregory, Cardinal Archbishop Wilton Gregory in D.C., has sued the District of Columbia over the lockdowns there. In my state, here in Virginia, our church is rather strong, and we've got a rather aggressive governor who's foolishly said the other day that, you know, where is God? And we can always pray to God.
Yeah, well, I'm going to play that for you in a second.
Yeah, I mean, he's the kind of guy who he's got personal problems of his own that we don't need to go in right now, but he just thinks he can kind of massage these things in whatever way he wants. I think that certain bishops, certainly out in California, the bishop in Brooklyn, where Andrew Cuomo has tried to shut down houses of worship to 10 people, no matter how large your church is. 10 people, this is absolutely ridiculous. I would have liked to have seen a better coordinated national response to this, but given the way that things are in different jurisdictions, maybe that's the best we can hope for right now. And I'm proud of those who have stepped out and spoken forcefully.
Father Jerry, the governors throughout the country, as Bob alluded to, are still trying to keep people out of churches. Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, who Bob was referencing there, had this to say about church worship during the holidays in a press conference last week. Listen to this. Give me your reaction.
This year, we need to think about what is truly the most important thing. Is it the worship or the building? For me, God is wherever you are. You don't have to sit in the church pew for God to hear your prayers.
Father Jerry, should we all just stay home, forget church? I feel God in my heart while I'm watching the NFL game.
Wow. I mean, how often do we have the governors and others criticizing bishops and priests to tell them what to do, particularly on our issues of morality? And here he is trying to instruct us on how to conduct divine worship. This is ridiculous. That governor and my own governor here in New York, they need to step back and say that the right to religious freedom in the United States is primary, and therefore they have to use every means possible to allow people to worship God. And that is decided by the people themselves to say, well, you can stay home. Okay, who appointed you the head religious advisor to the people of your state? That's ridiculous. Leave that alone.
No, I agree. I agree. And you saw that Supreme Court ruling that touched on what was happening in your state, in New York, where they said, look, you've got to look at these regulations in light of the Constitution. And it seems we have a rolling series of rulings referring back to that Supreme Court ruling. So that's a good sign. Now, a new administration is coming. They've made it clear, the Biden administration, that they plan to go after religious groups such as the Little Sisters of the Poor over that contraceptive mandate. What are the religious liberty dangers that you see on the horizon, not only for religious institutions, but believing individuals? Robert Royal.
Well, we just heard today that the Biden administration is being lobbied by some of the LGBT groups in that they want religious schools to have to adhere to the reigning ideology for them with regard to gender identity. And this, I think that we're going to see this come along very strongly. What they're doing is they're saying that these are science-based positions. In other words, that science tells us that gender is fluid and that we can't restrict people to male and female. He created. And this is just one of the groups of institutions. I mean, we're going to see, as the Catholic Church has the largest religious school network in the nation, of course, by far. And I think we're going to see pressure not only on them, the Little Sisters of the Poor. We've already seen pressure on groups that sponsor foster children. It's going to become quite radical, and it's going to reach into every nook and cranny where religious groups are active. And that's going to mean even poor relief and hospitals and other things. To me, this is shaping up. We know that the president-elect has appointed Becerra as his Health and Human Services secretary. We'll see if that gets through the Senate, by the way. But all these are signs that I'm saying that he is the first anti-Catholic president in the United States. We've had John F. Kennedy, who was kind of nominally Catholic, but at least he was Catholic and didn't oppose the church in public. Now we're going to see on abortion, on marriage, on sexual issues, and much more. I fear we're going to see a very aggressive new administration that ironically is going to be led by a person who likes to sport rosaries and yet manages to support the killing of 1 million babies in the womb a year and opposes what the church believes about marriage. It's really going to be a hairy time for not only Catholics but other religious believers in America.
Father Jerry, what position does this put the U.S. bishops in? If indeed you have a president who is manifestly Catholic, he claims to be Catholic, yet he opposes the church on so many of the issues that it advances, while sort of wrapping all of his agenda in this religious talk. I mean, I watch these publications swoon over, oh, he mentioned St. Francis, oh, he mentioned Pope Francis, oh, he mentioned St. Teresa. If you're punishing their daughters and sons, how does that add up? Why is that not looked at as hypocrisy rather than something to be lauded?
Well, here we face the big challenge, and the bishops have appointed a committee to deal with the challenges that are going to come forward. But the fact of the matter is, President-elect Biden has pledged to promote abortion, gender identity, the greater acceptance for transgenderism and all the attendant evils which go with that. Right now, I'm afraid that we're going to be seeing the Catholic Church declared a hate group. The Bible is going to be considered a hate text, and precisely because the Bible affirms reality, which is God made man and woman. Male and female is not an identity, it is nature, it is what we are. No one's assigned a gender at birth. That's ridiculous. Is anybody assigned a set of teeth? No, we recognize you have teeth in your mouth, that you have eyes and ears, and you recognize you're a male or a female. So what we have to do is basically get back to what it's called metaphysical realism. And the bishops have to promote an intellectual response to what's going on here. It's not enough to say, well, this policy is bad. No, we have to say the ideology which falsifies God's creation is a threat to the whole order of society. That's not alarmism. That's not alarmism at all. That's reality. And reality has to win. Otherwise, we enter the unreal world of dictatorship.
Looking back at some of the stories that have made headlines in the church this year, the McCarrick report was certainly one. Bob, we spent a lot of time on this, hoping it would come. It finally came. Did that report bring clarity and closure to the McCarrick case in your mind?
Well, what it gave us was what the church as an institution recognized in its documents, in the records that it had, about how McCarrick was promoted and perhaps some elements of a cover-up. It's useful to have that because it puts on the record what's actually in the files insofar as the people responsible were willing to release those files. Of course, it doesn't solve the larger question of how McCarrick was able to do what he did. And he did things not only on the way up in the church. I think as we see with the acceptance of politicians like Joe Biden in the United States, he was also at the center of making it acceptable for Catholics like this to exist in public. I mean, I've seen Biden say about abortion or homosexuality, it's a debate in the church, so it's like a political conversation. There's no sense that there are fundamental things at stake that lead us back to Christ, what Christ himself intended for the way we are supposed to live and what our institutions are supposed to be. So look, we got a peek into some of the institutional developments that allowed McCarrick to come forward, but there is much, much more that still has to be done. And I fear that that's going to have to be done not by figures inside the Vatican who, for various reasons, regard these things as hot potatoes that they don't want to get too deeply into. We're going to have to see people on the outside digging into this. And as with the Pell case, the truth eventually will be known. We'll know what happened.
Father Jerry, the Holy See officially renewed their agreement with China in October. Cardinal Zen of Hong Kong has been for years particularly outspoken about this deal. In October, he had this to say in an interview with me about the renewal of that Vatican-China deal.
The facts which follow the signing of the agreement all speak against the agreement because we see no improvement, but only the hardening of the position of the government, and the persecution is much more harsh than before.
Father Jerry, what did the Vatican get out of renewing this deal? They saw the carnage and fallout, the destruction of church property and church members in the first iteration of this.
Look, this is, in my opinion, one of the biggest errors of this pontificate. It has to do with a political decision that negotiating with the Chinese communists rather than supporting the underground church and opposing the communist power was the way to go. And I completely agree with Cardinal Zen. The Vatican is engaged in concession after concession. Cardinal Zen has spoken eloquently about the ordination of men to the episcopate, or the recognition of bishops ordained illegally, that somehow this is good. And many of these men are not worthy to be bishops. Their lifestyle is not good. What we have here, unfortunately, is a decision that negotiation with communists is possible. And, my reading of history and the way I see things, communists love it when people from the West show up at their doorstep and say, what do you want us to do? Because they know exactly what they want us to do. The communists want us to surrender to them. And I view this as a surrender. Cardinal Zen is a heroic man. There are heroic bishops and priests who are imprisoned because of the communist government. We shouldn't be negotiating with them. We should be telling them the religion of Christ stands firm with Christ, and we will not give communist appointees control over the flock. That's unfortunately what's happened.
Yeah, and they've blessed and sanctified these people who just a few years ago were considered outside the church. They were excommunicated. So it's an amazing turnaround. And I don't know what the transaction here is. What do they get out of the deal? Maybe it's money, but it's certainly not and any freedom for their flock or their those who deeply believe and cling to Rome. Bob, even with no details known, we don't know all the details of this deal. It's never been released. Why has the Vatican remained so silent when it comes to religious persecution in China or Hong Kong, but they have no trouble speaking up in other regions of the world where religious persecution is underway?
Well, of course, that's the main question, isn't it? I mean, we even hear now from secular sources that there's vivisection going on, that the Chinese are taking Uyghur Muslim prisoners and carving them up to sell their organs on the international market. It's a very lucrative practice. And it's the case that for whatever reason, the Pope cannot raise his voice. I don't see, why, even if there is an agreement, we can't raise our voices against abuses, against even others. There was a slight reference in the Pope's new book to the oppression of Uyghur Muslims in China, and the Chinese government instantly jumped on. So there must be something in the agreement that is a kind of a hair trigger. That is, the minute that there's a criticism coming out of the Vatican in public, somehow this seems to be a violation of what they regard as the settled principles of what this is. But since we don't know what this agreement is, and there aren't supposed to be international treaties made that are secret treaties, since we don't know what's in that treaty, we can only assume from the way that the Vatican behaves that there are some pretty strong muzzles that have been applied to the kind of normal criticism that one would have about any regime. The American regime or Latin America, they're all imperfect, and yet this is the one regime that we cannot say anything about. It's a caving into ideology, and it's a caving into liars. I mean, I've dealt with some of these religious officials in China. They were some of the biggest liars I've ever run into in Washington, D.C.
I want to shift gears to something that on the surface may seem light, but I think it tells us a great deal. This year's Vatican Nativity, it's very contemporary. This set, made in a region of Italy, took 10 years to create. It was created between 1965 and 1975, curiously. It includes a spaceman, some Darth Vader-like character. We don't quite know who he's supposed to represent. In his letter, Admirabile Signum, signed in December of 2019, Pope Francis wrote, "It is customary to add many symbolic figures to our nativity scenes, figures that have no apparent connection to the gospel accounts, yet each in his own way, these fanciful additions show that in the new world inaugurated by Jesus, there is room for whatever is truly human and for all God's creatures." The fact that this nativity was created in the 60s or 70s tells me a lot, Father Jerry. Art often reflects the reality of the time one imagines oneself to be in or holds up as an ideal. Your reaction, and why would the Vatican put a nativity that has figures like this? It has nothing to do with the Bible. They don't even try to explain who they represent, this spaceman and that ninja warrior or whatever the heck it is.
Yeah, this is can only be described as horrifying. One of the worst aspects of the 60s culture was, non-representational art, or art that distorted the human figure to produce weirdness. And this is what we see here. This is supposed to be a devotional setting so that pilgrims to Rome can pray in front of the nativity scene and give thanks to God for the incarnation. This kind of art rejects the theology of the incarnation. Humanity is not a perfect creation from God. Instead, we've got to invent, like Lego-like figures or Darth Vader. This is really an offense, and you have to say there are people who use this kind of art in order to overthrow philosophy and theology, which affirms the immutable nature of God's creation and the beauty of it, which is inherent. And that's why, when people go to Rome, where do they go? They go to the Renaissance churches. They want to see the beauty of art, the great works of art. They don't want to see what essentially is a nightmare from artists who take inspiration from things that are really fake. There's no astronaut at the birth of Christ. Why is that person there? That's crazy.
Yeah. Now, Bob, I'm going to give you a quick crack at this, 30 seconds, because we have to move on here. But it looked like Fisher Price in Purgatory or something. These are bizarre-looking figures.
My question is, if we didn't know that that was a nativity scene, would anybody think that it is a nativity scene? I mean, it's clearly the kind of thing that, look, if an artist wants to do this on his own time somewhere else, that's great. But as a nativity scene in St. Peter's Square in 2020, a year that we've all been so troubled. It's telling, by the way, that on Wednesday in his general audience, the Pope was sitting in a chair and he had a more traditional nativity scene right next to him. So maybe that was
I noticed that.
Yeah, that the powers that be maybe have done that thing in St. Peter's Square with or without the Pope's knowledge. But there was a kind of a recanting, I think, in that visual image on Wednesday.
Yeah. No, well, as an artist who's in Rome, they sent me a note earlier, and they said, well, it is an improvement over the naked guy. Remember the naked guy last year that they had at the edges of the nativity? So, well, so maybe Fisher-Price is a step up. We'll see. Now to our world over persons of the year. We wrestled this year over who that person should be. Ultimately, we decided that the people of the year should be Chinese, for resisting tyranny and for their willingness to risk life and liberty to alert the world to Beijing's brutality and fight for religious and personal freedoms. Our persons of the year are Cardinal Joseph Zen and Jimmy Lai. We originally were going to name the man who probably had the most impact on 2020, but I felt guilty about it, Chairman Xi Jinping. Look, he unleashed a virus that destroyed lives and global economies. He no doubt had an impact upon the presidential election here in the United States, compromised governments around the globe. He even managed to sign a deal, as we talked about a moment ago, with the Vatican that bought their silence as he rounded up faithful Catholics, Christians, Muslims, as well as freedom fighters. Xi taught the world how to make people follow orders and restrict freedoms. For that, Xi Jinping is our shadow person of the year. But we thought it better to extend the light rather than curse the darkness. Gents, I want to give you the last word, your reaction to this, and your thoughts for people as we go into this new year. Father Jerry, you first.
Well, that's a very good choice. Cardinal Zen, Jimmy Lai, a Catholic convert. These are wonderful men. I want to just throw my secondary honoree of the year would be Amy Coney Barrett and the President of the United States, if I can do that, because if we can thank God for Catholic teaching and Catholics who are faithful, I think Amy Coney Barrett is somebody who fits that category. And the President, God bless him, he fulfilled his promise to Catholics and all people of firm belief in human life that he would appoint a judge to the Supreme Court who was going to, in fact, uphold the law and not rewrite it.
Yeah, and you know, he got vilified this year. I mean, it's a political year, so of course he would be. But when you step back and look at his gains in the Middle East, his pro-life and religious liberty policy moves, it's very hard to quibble with any of those. Robert Royal.
Well, Raymond, I'm not going to reveal any of the back and forth we privately had about some of these possible candidates for Person of the Year. But I'll say yay to all of the above, and I'll also add Pfizer and Moderna, because I'm hoping that that's too something that the president and our marvelous American healthcare system were able to develop in record time. Let's hope that this brings about a remarkable change. I mean, everybody's criticized the president about this, said it would take a miracle to have a vaccine before the end of the year. And look, we've got 2 and maybe 3 and even more coming down the line. So it's been a rough year. I can't say that it can never get rougher because we know what's coming down the line. It's about to get a lot worse in Washington. But look, we've at least got maybe have got the virus a little bit under control. And at least that will give us a chance to fight differently in 2021.
Let us pray. Gentlemen, thank you both, and I want to wish you and your loved ones a very Merry Christmas. Commentary by Robert Royal and Father Jerry Murray can be found at thecatholicthing.org, and Columbus and the Crisis of the West by Robert Royal is still available at the EWTN Religious Catalog. Thank you both. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Raymond.
Merry Christmas.